Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Adamson. I'm the Curatorial Director here at Design Miami for 2024 and will be for 2025. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here and also to welcome Mr. Gerry McGovern, who is the Chief Creative Officer for JLR, so that's Jaguar Land Rover, which also has the Defender brand. And we are meeting with you at a very auspicious moment with a new Jaguar having been released, and we also have the fantastic Range Rover next door, which I hope you've all had a chance to look at. We'll be diving into those two cars and also all aspects about design, automotive, and otherwise. It turns out I've just been getting to know Gerry over the last couple of days that he's an extremely knowledgeable man on the subject, especially of mid-century design and art, so we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. But first, Gerry, I want to ask you just to tell us a little bit about your background. So you are from Coventry, which is sort of like being from Detroit in America. So can you tell folks a little bit about the city and your childhood there?
Hello, everyone.
Is it on?
Is that work? Is it on? That'd be a start, wouldn't it?
It's a high-level engineering, Gerry.
Hello. Is that on now? Isn't it nice to be in Miami? Better than Coventry. Yes, so I grew up in Coventry. I used to say sometimes when I got up at sort of talks, I'm from Coventry, somebody had to be, because in the sort of 90s, I think it got a sort of bad rap in Britain, probably because of the Specials group, and they created a record called Ghost Town. Who remembers that? Yeah. Ghost Town, yeah, you lot do, which was basically saying it was a ghost town, but yeah, I grew up in Coventry. I'm not telling you when, because it'll tell the age, but what was interesting for me was that Coventry, because it got absolutely decimated during the Second World War, it was rebuilt. And it was the first city to have its own architect, a guy called Gibson, who was very much a modernist. And actually, during the 60s, Coventry was probably one of the richest cities in Europe. And architects and planners from all over Europe used to go there because it was seen as the way you should design a modern-day city. It was pedestrian-free, and it was very future. And I suppose that sort of, for me, inspired this sense of always looking forward, not back. But it's interesting because it was juxtaposed with what were called the Three Spires, which were from the Middle Ages, because Coventry was a walled city, so it's a medieval city. So that juxtaposition of the old and the new always fascinated me. And I suppose it just informed from a very early age my sort of visual and artistic sensibilities. I was always influenced by visual things.
The cathedral also is incredible,
the
right?
Cathedral was designed by, because there's an old cathedral that got bombed, and then the new cathedral, it's interesting this, which was designed by Basil Spence, who was a great British architect. That caused a lot of controversy when it was done, a bit like Jaguar's doing at the moment, Stuart. Yeah, they hated it, it was lambasted, and now it's seen as a great sort of icon. And they have this huge tapestry in there, which was designed by an artist called Donald Sutherland. Not Donald, he was an actor. Graham, I do know. It was a Freudian slip. Oh, geez. Oh, it's gone. I've lost my bottle. Yeah, I always remember going up the steps, because I was a Catholic, and I was forbidden to go in there because it was a sort of Protestant cathedral. But I always used to creep in. I was fascinated by the architecture and that tapestry and the big sculpture that was outside. I know who designed that. Do you remember that, Richard? That huge sculpture of the devil. You should go there. Go and have a look at the cathedral, then get out as soon as you've looked at it.
Get thee to Coventry. So, Gerry, growing up in the midst of the auto industry there, was that what got you into cars or no?
Originally I knew I wanted to go into to do some form of creativity. At one point I wanted to be a soccer player. But then I wanted to be a painter, a graphic designer, and I was sort of going to go off to art college, and then I got approached by Chrysler at the time, and there was an opportunity to. I'd never thought about car design at all. I did like cars, but my father never had a car in his life, which is quite unusual. And an opportunity came along to go and, while I was going through college, to go into the design studios and be trained by the professionals. And I suppose that was the best of both worlds. Yeah, I wanted to be a painter until my art teacher said to me I wouldn't make any money until I died, so I thought I'd go into car design because I was told there was a lot more money in it. They got that wrong.
Although you did eventually have a connection with the Royal College of Art, no?
Yeah, I did go to the Royal College of Art. And, that in itself, going somewhere where you knew the greats, Barbara Hepworth, Henry Moore,
David
Hockney, and Ridley Scott. Yeah, they had a fantastic collection of art in the Royal College of Art. You'd make a lot of money if you're selling the art from there in here. Yeah. And they can't insure it. Don't tell anybody that, but they can't insure it. You know that, don't you, Brian? That collection.
Yeah, up in the senior common room, is that?
Yeah, in the senior common room.
That's right. Yeah.
You know everything.
Well,
that's because you're a curator.
So you did have a stint in America as well.
Yeah, I did. I had a couple of stints in America when I was very young. I went to work at Chrysler in Highland Park. That was just, I was sort of 21, and it was like, nobody wants to go to Detroit anymore, do they? But I don't know. But back then it was really interesting, having grown up in Coventry. But then I went back there, and quite a few years later I got headhunted by Ford to run Lincoln, to try and take it back to what it was in its heyday. That was in about 2000. And I sort of hired a lot of very good car designers. In fact, I was known as McGovern with the fat checkbook because I was hiring everybody at the time. And we've set a vision for Lincoln, which is about taking it back to its heyday when Hollywood movie stars used to go and get their Oscars when they were driving a 61 Lincoln or whatever. And we created all these concepts, some of which did very well, but we never built any of them, unfortunately. And as I said in my speech the other night, I don't like doing concept cars unless they turned into a reality, which can happen in the automotive world. But it was a good experience to understand, the American market, and then eventually I went back to what was Land Rover then.
Right, so let's talk about JLR as a brand family. Mm-hmm. So first of all, for those who are new to this topic, how do you distinguish between the three brands under the umbrella?
Here, is that right? Where, there? There, okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? What are you laughing at? Sorry.
So you've got Jaguar, you've got Land Rover, and you've got Defender. So how do you distinguish between them as a family?
Well, there's actually a missing one because, a few years ago we decided, there was a bit of confusion because the company was called Jaguar Land Rover. Mm-hmm. And that disguised the fact that within the company you had the two crown jewels that was Range Rover and Defender.
Right.
Then there was also Discovery, although in this country, did you call it Discovery? I think it was called LR1, 2, anyway. So the idea of the House of Brands was to elevate them as individual brands and completely separate them out and give them their own identity in what we call the sort of luxury space. I think we've started to do that very well with Range Rover. It does sit in that space now. And we reimagined Defender. I can remember people saying to me on Defender, "You're killing the brand." Well, it's doing all right now, isn't it? Yeah. I've got some of my colleagues here at the front and one over there. So they're here to heckle me, but they haven't started yet.
Keep you honest.
And then, of course, Jaguar, which we're completely reimagining. I don't know if any of you read anything about the new Jaguar brand. It's caused a little bit of controversy. I think we'd got something like 300 million... Sorry? Impressions. So we only needed to get 20 million, so we did that job. But I have a view, we have a view that great art, great creativity creates controversy. You know, I mentioned some of my heroes like David Bowie, Vivienne Westwood, even Alexandra McQueen, and then Richard Rogers, the architect. They were lambasted in their time, and now they're all, you know, they're heroes. So it's interesting with this whole campaign, the people that talk about, you know, we're ruining the brand. We're not ruining it. We need to make it relevant for a new a new world, a world that's changed massively, and equally importantly, a new customer group. We're moving it on.
Yeah, so let's, since we're on the topic, Gerry, can you say a little bit more about the thinking behind that new Jaguar?
Well, we talk about being brave, being fearless, copy nothing. And where that comes from, the founder of Jaguar, a guy called Sir William Lyons, once said a Jaguar should be a copy of nothing. And when you talk to people about Jaguar, they tend to talk about it in the past tense of, it was very famous here in America, but it is of a period, you know, 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But quite frankly, for the last 20, 25 years or so, it hasn't been a successful brand. And, you know, we had to reimagine it. And from a creative standpoint, it had to be a completely holistic view across all the creative platforms. I think that's something first time we've done it to this level for Jaguar. So not just the creative behind the design of the vehicle, but the creative behind the design of the brands in all the sort of creative disciplines, whether it's architectural design, product design, graphic design. We have, in fact, we got some of them in front here. We got Brian, who is the Chief Creative Officer of our agency, Accenture Song. We've got that lovely chap there with a nice haircut, Richard, who's my brand design director. And then we've got Blaine here, who is the head of comms and social media. He needs a clap, that bloke there. And he's from Coventry as well. And he studied in Coventry, and he's a Londoner, so we're Brits. Sorry about that. Where was I?
We were about to hear you unveil the secrets behind the new Jaguar.
I've forgotten those. I've spoken so much about them. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah? That's a shame. So what are the secrets? Well, you have to see it. What was interesting, though, is that we put out, I'm sure, everybody's seen the sort of teaser with the beautiful people in the colourful clothes. We didn't see that coming at us in terms of the reaction, because that was a genuine desire to show that Jaguar wants to be unique. We chose all those people. If you want to blame anybody for it, it's probably me and him. We chose these people because of their diversity and their uniqueness and the way they celebrated colour and the way they dressed, etc., etc. Then it became a sort of fuel right in the middle of a societal debate about diversity and politics. But the irony was that created massive publicity. And then you've got the other element of it, of course, which was quite funny. We said that when we roll out the new Jaguar brand, we didn't want to show any cars. It has to be the brand first. Great brands has to be the brands that inform the products, not the other way around. And so we said when we first started getting it out there, we wouldn't show any cars. So you're reading all the critics. It's a car advert without a car. Exactly. Because actually it's a brand sort of... I don't know how much has changed now that we've actually shown the products. But we said that we don't need to be loved by everybody. We have no desire to be, because that's what, you know, great creative work does. It is probably what who knows what Marmite is? Yeah, okay, you lot do. You either love it or you hate it, and that's fine. That's fine. What we don't want to do with it is just create something that's just average and boring.
What's in fact happened, Gerry, which is, I would have thought ideal from your perspective, was that in the face of a lot of skepticism and suspense, the car has now been unveiled and people are saying, actually, this car is awesome and it's incredibly exciting and people want to get in it, no?
And we're having some pretty cool people that are responding in that way. I think what a lot of people are celebrating is the bravery of trying to do something different. And clearly that is a massive tribute to the team. I have something like 800 people in my team. I'm the one that gets my head chopped off if it goes wrong. But, you know, it's a team effort. And creativity has been put right in the heart of it, and that's why we're here at Miami Art Week.
Well, precisely, because of course the question about big brands, big companies is always how do they prevent themselves from becoming so risk averse that they crush the creativity underfoot, right? And it seems to me that you've somehow managed to do that at JLR, and I'm sure we'd all love to know how you managed it. How do you get a company of that size to throw the dice like that?
A lot of perseverance. I think, first of all, you have to... Having said that, our board, and I sit on the board, I think any company that talks about the importance of creativity doesn't have their chief creative on the board is actually not being true. Because, people don't need Range Rovers, they don't need Jaguars. They desire them, and that's the difference. You're creating things that enrich their lives, that emotional, visceral, compelling nature of them. Whether they're electric or they're, driven on rocket fuel or whatever, that isn't the point. The point is that people buy into these brands because they're offering something to them that they find appealing. And I think our board of management, I know that they support that totally, and so do our owners. But this is a journey that we've been on for quite a few years. We've been doing it with Range Rover, and you're seeing the sort of results of that. We've followed by Defender, and now it's Jaguar's turn, and we're not where we need to be yet. But it is, when these Jaguars come out eventually, they won't be sold in conventional dealerships. They'll be sold in boutiques. Our first one will be in Paris, right in the middle of the great French luxury brands, and then the second one will be in London, in Knightsbridge. It's about the total experience of the brand, and the people that will like it won't like it, they'll love it, and the people that hate it, it's not relevant to them anyway.
Right.
That wasn't the question, was it? I digressed a little bit.
You don't get anywhere with a car like that by having people sort of like it, right? It's got to be love.
I mean, and it has the brand, the work that Richard and Brian has done on the brand in terms of the symbolism, why it's like the way it is. I mean, you see that in everything. You walk around this exhibition, and it's full of creative ideas that informed what has been produced.
So I do want to ask you for your take on Design Miami, Gerry, but before we get onto that, can we talk about the Range Rover just next door? So that's a one of one. It's a unique car. But you had said to me the other day that it had an incredible amount of investment and research behind it, R&D behind it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that relationship.
Well, I suppose it's great that you probably wouldn't normally find a vehicle at something like this. But in a way, it's just as much as an art form as anything else, because artists have fashioned it in their own way. But clearly, it is an incredibly complex piece of machinery. Lots of engineering has gone into it, the complexity of its ability to go off-road, and all those things that make it quite special. I mean, the Range Rover, when we did that, it was £1 billion investment. That's a lot of money to invest before you're even sold one. But our customers for Range Rover are generally people that love the heritage of the brand, but they want to see it in a modern context. You'll get people say, when you say to you, what do you want the next Range Rover to be? They'll say, why are all these people walking out? I'm not really sensitive, am I, Stuart? you know, they want the best. And Range Rover, what is unique about Range Rover? It's peerless. There's nothing else like it. You look at all these different car companies that try and copy it, but it's got that heritage in there, and we've evolved it. We've evolved it over the time, which makes it absolutely relevant and highly desirable. And it's a continuum. And what you're seeing there is a particular version of it, because we have customers that want their own version of it. We do that by giving them special colours, materials, etc., etc., and it costs a lot of money to do. You know, just as an aside, the colour pink, because actually that car, we did it blue, which is your theme, isn't it?
Blue sky. Is that blue sky?
Blue, because when we started talking about that car, we had another colour. I think you wanted another colour, didn't you, Stuart? Sorry? Gold. But we thought that the white with that blue was more relevant to a Floridian.
Because there are colours right there, yeah.
Aesthetic for Range Rover. On the other hand, for Jaguar, that's where the pink came from. The designers wanted to do a silver car. Everybody does a silver concept car. Let's do pink. The Pelican, the sort of Art Deco, you know, celebrate.
Yeah.
But that was misinterpreted, wasn't it, slightly?
What about that
Anyway.
that gradient of the
Oh
blue?
yeah, that's something that's quite unique and quite difficult to do in terms of the paint process, where you've faded that blue from the front fender and the bonnet. When somebody suggested that, I said, "Are you mad?" But actually, it works pretty well.
Yeah.
And it's putting a bespoke sort of feel to it. We won't do all our vehicles like that, but it's a very special edition. I think it looks fabulous. That's a good investment. Forget the Calder over there at 240,000. Buy that Range Rover. What's that selling at? You don't know. All right, fine.
So
It's not honest. I'm not up here to sell cars. I'd rather talk about art.
So, Gerry, before we get onto the art, let's talk about one other aspect of car design, which is the fabled disruption that the industry is meant to be going through, which is obviously partly about electrics, but it's also about climate change. It's about the broader context of how we do transport as a society. How do you think about that when you sit down to actually work with the team and create a new vehicle?
Well, the interesting thing is that the whole sort of electric platform debate has probably slowed down in that there isn't the speed of take-up for it that we thought. However, it is coming at us because in terms of legislation will mean within a certain period of time everything will have to be electric or another form of propulsion. The irony is that most of the sort of up until now sort of electric vehicles, to me, they all look the same, because what they're doing is they're shortening the bonnet because you don't need a bonnet anymore because there's not an engine there, and they're extending the cabin to give you more space. But hello, that ain't going to give you an exuberant proportion. So what we did is we turned that round and said we don't want to be like that. You know, the first fundamental of car design is what we call optimum proportions. And if it's exuberant, the bonnet length is a key indicator of that. So then we designed the actual electric platform to deliver the design rather than the other way around. So that's where this is different. And yeah, people want electrification because, is this working at the back?
Yeah, sorry.
Is it? Because they want to be morally responsible and sustainable, and that's great. That's what we are doing. But we want to do it in our own unique way. Interestingly, in places like China, they don't see electric as being luxury, so because they just see it as a commodity. The reality is, electric vehicle will give you everything and more that a traditional, ICE engine will give you, and it's quicker, lighter. Not always lighter because of the weight of the batteries. So, and once everybody has those things, what are you left with? You're left with basically the brand and the design. That's your key differentiator.
Right.
And the sort of customers that will, we believe, be interested in Jaguar are not your typical car enthusiasts. They're people that are unique, they're individual, they like creative, they love art, they love design, and they want something that is unique, that communicates their own unique personalities. So it's a new brand for a new world in a lot of respects.
Right. You said something there in passing, Gerry, that I think is quite important, which is about the inversion of the usual priority of engineering and design.
Mm-hmm.
So that made my ears prick up. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean?
If we go back a number of years ago, car designs were generally done, except for what we'd call a sort of bespoke or, the one-off type vehicles that you used to have in the 20s and 30s that were incredibly expensive. But generally in the car design world, it would start with the engineering. So you'd engineer the car, which means where's the engine going, what's the length, the platform, what's the boot space, what's the package space, etc., etc. And then you say to the designers, right, can you make something, not draw something around that and make it nice?
So you're creating an envelope, basically.
Yeah, well, we don't, but that isn't what good proper design is about. Proper design is about starting from scratch. If I was making a correlation in the furniture design world, it would be something like Eames. When he designed the Eames lounge chair, he didn't get a frame from somewhere and then shape round it. He designed the whole thing. Right. So it has to start with, what do you want this vehicle to be in terms of its, not just its aesthetic, what do you want it to mean as a brand in terms of its values and purpose? Start with that, and then when you've got a concept, then you say to the engineers, right, we need you to engineer that car. It's a different way of working, and that will give you things that are unique.
So in practice, does that actually involve the designers knowing more about engineering and vice versa?
Not necessarily, though. Most designers clearly you've got to have a level of understanding, but we've got great engineers who are passionate about delivering the designs. I mean, in the old days, because I come from the old days, you got the engineers here and you got the designers there. And the engineers would call the designers flower arrangers, and the designers would call the engineers members of the Flat Earth Society. And the two would never, but that's all changed. Right. It's had to change. And we have our own studio engineers who are very knowledgeable about how you package and engineering a vehicle to deliver a design that's unique.
What about the influence of digital tooling on the design and engineering?
In terms of tools and the process of getting from concept through to production, the digital world has speeded everything up massively. Of course. But, and most of the designers now tend to work on a tablet. When I started off, it was what are you laughing at? It was sketching, it was magic markers, it was great. But the digitalization speeds up the process and delivers a lot of quality, etc., but you still got to have the creative spark in the first place.
Do you think that there's also an aesthetic result from digital tools? Because I've heard it said, for example, that the shift from airbrush rendering to magic marker in the 60s
made you're knowledgeable. Yeah, you're right.
A big difference, right.
I remember being interviewed many years ago at a motor show, and the journalist said to me, it was when we did the Freelander, which was sort of 97, 96, and this journalist said, how have you gone about designing this? And we were still using, sketching, model making, clay models. Emanates from America, from the 40s, 50s. Mm-hmm. And then once we'd got the design, that's when computers would really come in to take that and take it through to production. Not as quickly as that. And this guy said to me, well, I've just been talking to somebody at Ford, and they said that on their newest model, they've done everything on computer. And I said, yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it? Yeah. Funny thing is, I went to Ford a few years later. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, so it did, but maybe there's a maturation process there where you master the tool, right?
The other thing that's going around at the moment is the use of AI. We're trying to use AI to answer every question. It's funny, that one, isn't it, Brian? Because, again, if everybody's using AI to ask it questions about how you should design something, who the customer is, what are you got to be careful. If everybody's doing that, you're going to get the answer the same, aren't you?
Same answer.
And I'm sure if we'd put that design, Brian, into the AI tool, it has spat out, don't do that, you'd be balmy.
Yeah, exactly. We actually have a panel on Friday about AI and design. We'll see if it's a good idea or not, so come on back for that. In fact, we have
I'll
Tony.
be back in London.
Tony Fidel.
In the rain.
Exactly. Tony Fidel from Nest is going to be on that panel as well, which is a great thing. But so do come back for that. But what about the question of materiality in the cars? Obviously, that has a big sustainability impact. So that must be an area of innovation for you as well. No?
Materiality is becoming increasingly important, and it always has been important, particularly in the luxury world. And that dilemma of what is perceived to be a luxury material or finish and how you achieve that against the backdrop of being sustainable is always a tricky one. And I think we went through a period, in fact, with our Range Rover Velar, where we used Coventry, which is a well-known company in the world of interior design, where we textile design, where we were getting, because you tend to think of a car and you think a luxury car has to have leather seats. That's it. Well, it doesn't. But we did go through a period where we got so preoccupied, I think, with sustainability, where we took the celebration of colour and texture and we neutralised it. And what we're trying to do is bring that back. But, sustainability is a big one for us. But there's a lot of innovation going on out there in terms of materials, material finishes, and I think we see in the product design world they're probably more advanced than we are in the automotive world. But in the automotive world, you've got far more legislation around what you can use and you can't use. I mean, just think about the original cars used in the 50s. They had Bakelite steering wheels. Couldn't have one of those now, because if you had a Bakelite steering wheel, you get a headache, and probably far more. So legislation is always pushing back against what you're trying to do as well.
Are you of the opinion that we have too much legislation applied to the auto industry? I know UK and US are different, but
if it's ultimately if it's saving lives of people, then it's a good thing.
Yeah.
We have things like pedestrian safety. So, the front of a vehicle, we have to design it in a specific way so that if a pedestrian hit it, he's forced up and not under. Because if you go under, even things like the distance, on a conventional car where you've got an engine and a bonnet, there's a distance there that you've got to have in order that if somebody hit the bonnet, they're not going to hit the engine. So there's a lot of legislation is applied, and that's why it generally takes 5 years to go from concept to production.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we had a swift mood lighting break there, but
hurry up.
Yeah. So one last question about the kind of disruption period that we're in. What about self-driving cars? Are you thinking about that at JLR?
Oh, of course. We've got planned over the next number of years. It is a progressive thing. I always think about it in this way, right? Everybody, you're getting on a plane tomorrow, right? You go up the steps onto the plane. The steward says, "Good morning, madam, sir. Just wanted to let you know we got no pilots today, but we're flying by wire. But don't worry, it'll be fine." How many people would get back would walk back down the steps? So it's going to be a progressive thing. I think the ideal would be to have the ability to do both, which is what we're trying to do. So it is coming. But if people love driving cars, they're not going to want to not engage with it. But the duality of both is where it has to go, really.
And do you think in practice it will be a spectrum where there's a kind of assistance to the driver rather than a full takeover in many cases?
Yeah, but also you've got to have the infrastructure around not just the car, but also the road infrastructure as well.
Yeah, just like the powering for the electrics.
And the same with, electrification. A lot of these countries, signed up to electrification and imposed certain rules about by 2030, 80% of your product's got to be electric, but they didn't put any investment to create the infrastructure for charging. And it's a massive thing. But what we're really interested in is what they look like, aren't we, boys?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about art for a second. So you, as I mentioned, are extremely interested in this, and I'll tell a quick story, which is that we had gotten Gerry almost to the Range Rover booth yesterday, and he suddenly said, hey, is that a Victor Vasarely tapestry over there? And took a hard left, right? So the guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to art history and design history. What are your main sources of inspiration? How does it actually influence your work as a designer?
I've got to be careful here because I've got my sort of advisor here who's equally as knowledgeable at art. Mind you, he's made me buy a few things that I've looked back at.
Well, he named his son Calder for one thing, so that tells you something.
And by the way, I'm not a massive fan of Vasarely because he tends to make your eyes go a bit funny, but he was a disruptor. I do like some of his things. Look, how much art influences subliminally what you do, you don't know. But I don't think you can be a creative if you're not interested in art forms. And for me, God, the list would be as long as your arm in terms of who I admire. I did discover, Brian, you knew them before I did, a group of female artists from the 60s that I only discovered maybe a couple of years ago. People like Joan Mitchell, Frankenhaler, Lee Crash. I was just flabbergasted by how great their work was. I mean, Lee Krasnick, in my view, was much better than Pollock. Mm-hmm. But because at that time, unless you were a man, you didn't get promoted. We've changed that now. Nearly every person on my first line is a female. Mm. All right, not everybody.
Yeah.
But so who went to the Rothko exhibition in Paris last year? Anybody here? No? You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. No, I'm joking. That was, for me, that was inspirational. Mm-hmm. But he was a manic depressive, of course, and I love the story of the Seagram building, the paintings he did for the Seagram building for the Four Seasons, and then he said you can't have them, and he ripped up the cheque. I'm a bit of a lover of British painters.
You mentioned Patrick Heron.
Patrick Heron. But then there's a Frenchman called Sillage who he was pretty good. And then there's the classics, aren't there? There's Matisse, there's Leger, there's Picasso, all those.
And Gerry, when you walk around the fair, what grabs your attention most?
I do tend to sometimes gravitate towards mid-century modern, and I think that's partly because in my work I'm very much focused on the future, and I think we should celebrate some of the great stuff. And I know it's been copied ad nauseum, but when you think of, the furniture designers, whether it's Arnie Jacobson or Saarinen, and they were architects as well, I still find a lot of that stuff really appealing because where were they taking their inspiration from? Nowhere. I mean, furniture designers now, for example, have got a whole feast of inspiration that's gone before them.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, I remember meeting an architect called Pierre Koenig who did the case study houses in the 50s in LA. And I met him about 20 years ago, and I said to him, who inspired you back then? And he designed the case study house 23, which is the most famous one. You know that one, looking out over the canyon. Hollywood. Yeah. I said, who influenced you? He said, nobody. And he said, I know that sounds a bit arrogant, but you have to remember back then, you didn't have the communications you have today, and that was 20 years ago. Right. So he said, you just did your own thing. And the thing that taught me was if you want to be truly original, don't take notice of anybody else.
Right.
Which is hard to do when you're surrounded by so much stuff now.
But that's interesting. It's like what you were saying about AI. If you have too much influence, it kind of drives you to a mediocre middle that's sort of banal, right? Yeah. It's not exceptional any longer. Do you think, looking back...
I think that's important. Mm-hmm. Mediocrity, for me, is the kiss of death.
Right.
You don't want to be you don't want to be, and businesses tend to be risk averse because, if you're investing £1 billion into the development of a vehicle, you've got to keep your shareholders happy, your owners, and people will naturally go risk averse. But what that means is you end up doing things that potentially could fail anyway, because I think people now are generally, they're far more sophisticated, particularly in the luxury space, in the creative space. They want things that actually have got credibility and things that stir the emotion. And if you just do things that are normal, what's going to differentiate you?
Looking back, do you think that there was thinking about the Jaguar, the classic Jaguar you mentioned earlier, do you think that there was a very strong influence between what was happening elsewhere in modern design and what was happening in the automotive industry at that time?
I think that particular aesthetic was of its time. And if you think about the E-Type, it was quite unique. You can imagine seeing that for the first time. You probably think, is it a spaceship that had just fallen down from the sky? Those rounded forms as well were of a particular period when aerodynamics was quite important. The thing about them was they were unique, and that's why we said that don't look back to those for your influence. You can celebrate the essence of what they were about in terms of trying to be unique and different, but don't try to visually emulate them. But if you think about that old 50s, 60s, in America, for example, I always loved American cars growing up because they were so exuberant, they were so big, and the soaring fins, because all that sort of thing about America getting to the moon first, beat the Russians, and it was all manifesting in the sort of visuals of cars. And of course they called it the style wars because every year Chrysler, GM, Ford, they were just changing the bodies to get market share. It was built-in obsolescence. But interestingly, what came out of it was some beautifully sculpted vehicles, and now they're all boring. Well, not all boring, but that was, and then anyway.
Well, you also had a hothouse of competition in Detroit, whereas now you have a global industry with all these brands competing in a much more multi-variable way, right?
It's interesting you mentioned competition because when we first started the new Jaguar brand, I had a competition where, because Jaguar had been in a particular mindset for quite a long time, those particular designers would find it quite difficult to get out of it. So we engaged the whole creative organisation, and we set up 3 different design teams with 3 different leaders, gave them the same brief, and we created a competition. And what came from that is what you saw in, what you're seeing now in terms of that Jaguar concept, which is just one of the vehicles. But we wouldn't have got to that unless we created that competition. And it was quite funny because the design leaders at the time, none of them wanted to do it, of course.
Right.
One said, no, I could do it on my own. I'm the Jaguar designer. I don't need any help. And another guy was saying, no, that's up to... But when we brought them together and we created this competition, because competition is good. It can create tension and it can promote creativity. The downside to it is once you've chosen a direction, if you don't handle the culture properly after it, you can, as a creative unit, that unity can be broken. And that, if I'm honest, that was a bit of a problem for us for a while after that, but we got the result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'd have some demoralization. But this is how they run architecture competitions as well, right? And that's how you get a great building, right?
But the thing not to do is... Everybody in the design work can be anything. I'm sure it certainly happens in architecture, all forms of creativity. In the automotive world, I remember when you'd create a model, a full-size model, which would be made in clay. You'd put Dynoc on it, which is painted with car paint. It looks like a real car at a distance. And suddenly all these people would appear. The marketeers, the CEO's wife, the cleaners, and suddenly everybody got a view about, oh, maybe that line could change, this line could change. They suddenly all became experts interesting thing is there was none of them around when there's a blank sheet of paper. And that's something we don't encourage. And it's the same with the brand world. Everybody could criticise an advert, can't they? Brian, coming up with something that's quite unique and means something is quite difficult. I suppose the thing I'm most proud about on this Jaguar is the way the total approach to the whole creative across all the teams and all the platforms has come together. It's been truly collaborative, and you get the best creativity when you work as a team. Too much competition isn't good. A little bit creates tension, but after that, once you've agreed on a direction, you've all got to get behind it.
Yeah. But you don't get a spark without friction. So
no.
Yeah. So one last question, Gerry, and I'm keenly aware that you've just done something intensely futuristic, but since we're devoting the fair to blue sky thinking, I'd love to ask you to peer deeper into the future. Where do you think these brands are going to be in 10 years' time, 20 years' time?
Beats the hell out of me. I'll be retired. I think in terms of particularly our world of automotive design, I think to think any further out than next cycle, 6, 7 years, I think is a way, it's not relevant because you don't know how the world is going to change, because that will inform or impose the way you design things that are basically going to be driven on our roads, etc. So we continue to develop in the digital space. How do we make our communications quicker? How do we do more research about what's going to work, what isn't going to work? But there still has to be a level of gut feel, of not knowing, of leaders actually being brave enough to make decisions to vision what is going to come. A computer won't tell you that. So, answer to your question, I think probably 20 years ago we said that there'd be much fewer car companies in the world and they'd be owned by just a few, and that's happened. But the brands that will survive are the ones that, continue to intrigue people and continue to be appealing to people, because ultimately creativity in any form is what enriches people's lives and culture. If we didn't have that, we might as well just all go to sleep, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's open the floor to questions, shall we? Questions for Gerry McGovern. One here. Just wait for the mic, please. Dustin will bring it.
Thank you. If you would return, please, to the question you referenced to how you maintained the traditional proportion of your designs despite the changed engineering beneath it of electrification. In a sense, a romantic notion of maintaining the traditional form of the car. I don't know if you saw the new post office truck, which is rather controversial, which is a new design based on electrification. It has virtually no bonnet, and everyone hates it. The drivers hate it, the public hates it. And yet it was a fresh design. And I wonder where the conflict between kind of the underlying truth of design, of form and function, comes into play, or are we just continuing to please an audience and ourselves with our own romantic notion of what a great car should look like, and we will be caught unawares when a disruptor comes along with a completely new vision of what an automobile would look like.
Well, we've seen in the what's the car that's being driven around a lot here? The Cybertruck. That's a disruptive view. It's an interesting question. I think the first thing you have to be careful of is you don't over-intellectualize this. There are fundamentals to design, and actually the design of the new Jaguar, I wouldn't say, it's only classic proportioning to one degree, and that is the long bonnet and the shorter cabin that gives you that thrust, that exuberance. Everything else is totally modern in terms of its surface development, the way it's built, its details, etc., and the way it embraces the brand and its symbols, etc. What I meant about the engineering, the architecture, is the architecture has been tailored to create that shape. And from a sort of functional standpoint, is it having a really detrimental effect on it? Not really, because it's low slung. Batteries are heavy anyway. Is it difficult to get in and out of? Yes, it is. But it's this thing about, this isn't a vehicle, a functional commodity for everybody to use it as an everyday car. Of course, what you're saying, there has to be cars like that. But what we're doing here with Jaguar, we're selling dreams, so we're creating dreams, it's art. And one thing I do know with, 40 years experience or whatever it is, that a good-looking car, you won't create a good-looking car with a short bonnet and a long cabin. You'll create a functionally very efficient car, absolutely no doubt. Will it stir the emotions because we're driven emotionally by what we see? My view on that is you won't. But there's room for all of it. You know, people will do that, but I don't think there's one trick fits all. If that answers the question, but it's a very good question.
Yeah.
Very intelligent question. Bet you couldn't have answered that, could you, Richard?
It's a question as old as modernism, I suppose. The question of whether principles drive design or whether it's emotion that drives design.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question for you. What is modernism? What is modernism today?
Yeah, we have 10 minutes left.
It's all right, you don't have to answer it.
Let's have another question from the audience, shall we? Brian, you've been invoked several times. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the...
I can jump in with an actually that
Dustin,
it's me, the mic runner.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been wondering ever since, Glenn mentioned that you clearly have a real appreciation for art in general. And you've been in this individual industry for a really long time, in automobiles, where of course that can be employed. I'm curious if after 40 odd years, there's another realm or industry that you've often thought, I wonder what that would have been like.
For me personally?
For you personally?
I suppose my sort of career has evolved in that I started as a pure car designer, doing exterior design. And then it went from that to interiors. And then I became, I moved up the ranks where I became interested in how you lead design. What stirs me now is the complete holistic nature of the creativity behind brand and how it informs the design of the products. And for me, I find that fascinating. How do you take Range Rover, Defender, and Jaguar, which are three great British brands, and incidentally, I'm looking after a few other brands, which I can't mention, that are British, that have a unique heritage, but need to be firmly kicked forward in terms of their relevance in a modern context. But in all the work we do together, we are always informed, whether it's conscious or subconscious, by what's going on in the art world. One of the reasons why we collaborated with these young artists, because that enriches the way we approach creativity, and also hopefully enriches them as well. So we engage with three artists here at Miami Art Week, and we basically said to them, look, that's our brand world. How would you manifest that in your world in terms of your specific discipline, whether it's photography, art, dance, painting, etc.? And you go and have a look at that over at Jungle Plaza, because it's really interesting. And we would have never have done that before. And I think, in the automotive world, some companies sponsor Sky Art, whatever it is. But there aren't many true, what I would call creative, artistic endeavors going on out there. And that's something that we want to engage with. So for me, I joke about retiring. I think if you're a true creative, you never stop, because you continue to be curious and drive everybody up the wall, I think. It's good fun.
And drive them down the street, too.
Yeah.
Brian, did you want to add anything? Hold on for the mic, though, so everyone can hear you.
You could ask me
He's
later.
got a big voice, but
If you weren't a car designer, what would it be? What would you do?
Maybe be a football manager.
I can see that. I can see that.
I always wanted to do something artistic. I'd love to paint, but it's too late now. I'd love to be a gallery owner. A friend of mine in London, his name's Alan Christia, Brian knows him as well. I said to him about 20 years ago, I'd like to do what you do. And he said, you're too old for that now. And that was 20 years ago. So I think, do I have a desire to do? Yeah, I do want to do other things, but not yet. Remember that in Gladiator where he said, the first one where he said, not yet. Who's seen the new Gladiator movie? Is it as good as the first one? No, it's good fun though. Sorry, Brian, that wasn't a very learned answer, was it?
That's fine.
We have talked a lot about sequels, though, so that's quite on point. Any last questions for Gerry before we have to break? Going once, going twice. Okay, amazing conversation. Thank you, Gerry.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Just to the audience, thank you for listening because you were very attentive. You're all very well behaved here. And the same the other night at Jungle Plaza, I thought to be shouting. Everybody listened. And you know what that is? It's because it's an artistic, sophisticated group. So well done to you.
Yeah. We attract the better class of design enthusiasts, that's for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.